At 2:47 p.m., a Ukrainian attack helicopter did something no pilot should ever attempt. It flew low and slow, straight into the kill zone of a Russian missile team. To the Russians, it looked like a gift. An Mi-24 Hind, bristling with rockets, exposed in broad daylight over a quiet sector. It seemed suicidal. Unless, of course, there was a hidden reason. This part of the front, Olski, had been silent for months. Only drones and the occasional artillery strike. And yet here was a gunship, loaded with 4 B-8V rocket pods. Each pod carried 8 rockets, 80 in total. These unguided 80mm projectiles weigh almost 12 kilos each, packing enough punch to pierce 400mm of armor. The helicopter was armed for a battlefield brawl, but showing up here was like a pro athlete walking into a kid's game. It made no sense, at least not to the Russians. Watching from 3.2 kilometers away, a two-man Russian MANPADS team tracked the Hind's approach. They carried the 9K-38 Igla, a shoulder-fired missile system weighing almost 18 kilos, with a warhead strong enough to shred the helicopter in an instant. But what really mattered wasn't the explosive charge. It was the missile's infrared seeker, cooled with nitrogen to cut through flare countermeasures. On paper, this missile should have had no problem locking on. The Ukrainian pilot, however, had other plans. He rolled into a dive and unleashed all 80 rockets in one furious ripple fire. A storm of explosions blanketed a 500-meter wide impact zone. But something was off. Many rockets splashed into the river or slammed harmlessly into empty fields. Only a few hit real targets. It looked sloppy, wasteful, almost random. To the Russians, it was proof they had an easy kill. But in reality, this widespread wasn't a mistake, it was bait. Sophistication to discriminate between these signatures. It loses lock on the helicopter and selects the brightest heat source. A cluster of burning rocket impacts, 150 m from the aircraft. The missile streaks harmlessly past the Ukrainian helicopter, close enough for the crew to observe, but far enough to avoid any damage from the proximity fuse. This miss was always the expected outcome. The real victory is what happens next. By firing their missile, the Russian MANPADS team has just sealed their fate. The launch signature, a brilliant infrared plume visible to multiple sensors, pinpoints their exact position in the building. Ukrainian signals intelligence systems immediately triangulate the launch using the missile's heat signature combined with the electromagnetic emissions from the team's communications equipment. The critical 90-second window for signals intelligence processing represents a revolution in battlefield awareness. In previous conflicts, identifying and transmitting a firing position might take 15 to 30 minutes. But Ukrainian forces have compressed this timeline through integrated sensors and streamlined communication protocols. By the time those 90 seconds expire, the targeting data has already reached the appropriate strike asset. In this case, the data transmits to a waiting FPV drone operator positioned 8 kilometers away. This represents a fundamental evolution in helicopter tactics. Rather than avoiding air defense systems, Ukrainian pilots now deliberately expose themselves to draw fire. This acceptance of risk doctrine represents a complete reversal of traditional helicopter employment. Instead of using terrain, masking, and standoff weapons to avoid air defenses, Ukrainian pilots now use their aircraft as bait, trusting in countermeasures and accepting potential losses to achieve the greater goal of eliminating enemy air defense networks. It's a calculated gamble that traditional military minds would never teach, but it's proving devastatingly effective. The acceptance of calculated risk transforms the Mi-24 from potential victim to an active hunter that eats a glass for breakfast. The Russian team, meanwhile, begins their standard post-engagement procedure, completely unaware that an 8-minute countdown to their elimination has started. Soviet doctrine calls for immediate relocation after firing to avoid counter-batter response. In the Cold War era, this shoot and scoot tactic provided reasonable safety as enemy response times measured in tens of minutes or hours. But modern surveillance technology and worked operations have compressed this timeline to single digits. And the real genius behind this operation is about to begin. At 2:49 p.m., the FPV drone operator receives final confirmation of the target coordinates. The operator powers up a modified commercial quadcopter. Its civilian origins hiding a military purpose. The 1.5 kilograms warhead attached where a camera gimbal would normally sit represents a perfect fusion of consumer technology and military innovation. The drone lifts off and sets course for the Russian position, flying at just 50 m altitude to avoid radar detection and visual observation. The Russian MANPADS team rushes through pack-up, focused on gear rather than security. The 9K-38 Igla, though man-portable, demands several precise steps before it can be stowed. The launch tube must be detached from the gripstock. The spent battery coolant unit safely discarded to avoid chemical exposure, and the thermal battery that powered the seeker removed. Each part is then placed in its carrying case. Under ideal conditions, this takes 4 to 6 minutes, an eternity on a modern battlefield. In the Dnipro River Delta's mud, it becomes a nightmare. Summer rains have turned the ground into glue. Boots and equipment cling to the earth. The ruined building that once offered concealment and a stable firing platform now forces the team to pick their way over debris and broken stairs while hauling roughly 17.9 kilograms of kit. That pack-up window is a critical vulnerability Ukrainian forces identified early. During disassembly, crews are task-fixed and cannot maintain full situational awareness. Drone crews train specifically to exploit that 4 to 6 minute exposure. Ukraine's distributed operational model makes the response fast. Operators receive coordinates directly from signals intelligence and can strike immediately, without routing targeting up through battalion, brigade, and division headquarters. That flat command structure, more Silicon Valley than Soviet Army, compresses decision cycles from half an hour to under 2 minutes. The choice of Olski for this mission was deliberate. On busier fronts, a MANPADS launch might be lost in chaos. In this quiet sector, any military action draws immediate attention from intelligence assets. The Ukrainian commander picked the area to maximize psychological effect. Every Russian air defense team monitoring radios would soon learn what happened to crews who engaged Ukrainian aircraft. At 14:54, 6 minutes after the failed engagement, a Ukrainian drone closed on the target. The operator's first-person feed showed 2 Russian soldiers still wrestling with their gear at the firing position. The 17.9 kilograms Igla system, already awkward in the best conditions, was nearly impossible to handle in the mud. The drone's approach minimized detection. Flying at about 50 m kept it below the detection envelope of most radars. Its small plastic frame produced a tiny radar cross-section, and electric motors gave off almost no thermal signature compared with fuel-powered aircraft. Its acoustic signature, a high-pitched whine audible only within 100 to 200 m, meant that by the time anyone heard it, it was already too late. The crew, consumed by pack-up, had only seconds to react. Ukraine's decentralized targeting and direct intel feeds let operators exploit that narrow window quickly and decisively. Through the FPV camera, the operator makes final adjustments to ensure optimal placement. The 1.5 kilograms explosive device, while small by military standards, provides sufficient effect against personnel and equipment in the open. The drone accelerates toward the building, diving from its cruising altitude to maximize kinetic impact. At 2:55 p.m., 7 minutes after firing their missile, the Russians finally noticed the incoming threat. The distinctive sound of drone rotors burned into every soldier's memory after months of combat triggers immediate recognition. But in the confined space near the building, carrying heavy equipment through mud, no escape route exists. They can only watch as the drone makes its final approach. The operator maintains lock through the camera feed, making final corrections to ensure the warhead impacts exactly between the 2 soldiers and their equipment. The drone path is true. Its purpose clear. 8 minutes ago, these men fired at a Ukrainian helicopter. Now they're in